One. Hi everyone, Joe March here with the Grand Infinity, and today I'll be talking to Greg on another candid conversation. And Greg, could you say a few things about yourself?
My name's Greg. I'm an artist. I've been interested in Hermeticism, occult thinking for a while now.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know what else you want me to say.
No, that's fine.
All right.
Yeah, so when we talked a little bit before, you had mentioned that your interests lied in art, creativity, and the tarot. So I felt like we could get into that a bit. I know we've talked a little bit about art and how it relates to the occult here before, but I haven't had a lot of talk about how tarot relates to all that. So you could give me kind of like a brief idea of how those things interconnect.
Well, I think I've been doing creative things since I was like a little kid. Started out playing music,
Hmm.
and I was in bands, a punk rocker, and then got into writing. Um,
Yeah.
got into film for a while, and then eventually got into like fine art stuff. I would say that the tarot relates to art and creativity in a lot of ways, just because it's visual
Hmm.
and it's using the language of symbols, which
Right.
is in the language of the subconscious.
Right.
So I believe that like even if an artist doesn't necessarily have attunement into hermetic studies or the
Mhm.
occult, that they are tapping into very much the same collective conscious.
Yeah, I
For
would agree with that too.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I had been doing all this creative stuff beforehand,
Hmm.
and when I got into Hermeticism, it was kind of like the science
Yeah,
of it, for a better term, and then kind of being like, oh, that's just
yeah,
putting a name to something that I've been experiencing for a really long time.
right. Yeah, and I've been having that. I had that when I first got into this, and I'm having it again because I think I was talking about last time I was on here that I started reading Franz Barden's book, and it is
Oh, awesome.
very hermetic based a book, and reading it from the beginning, I'm seeing some of the beginning steps again, but they're just phrased a different way, and it's just reminding me of like, oh yeah, I remember having to do this first, and I'm gonna go through these steps again because I think it's good to kind of renew your practice. But
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
but it's definitely one of those things where I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this, and it's certain things that I forgot were even important because they become part of your life after a while, and you do them
yeah,
without thinking about them. And so I look at it like, oh yeah, I should probably talk about this with people because they don't know that step because I'd already done it. I didn't. You don't think about how it relates and things like that. But it
definitely.
gives you kind of a feedback of like, oh, these steps lead to the next step, and that kind of clears some things up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I definitely feel that a lot of artists, I think, are tapping into that synchronicity or collective consciousness or what have you, whether they know it or not. And I think that's
Mm.
why you get a lot of these kind of conspiracy theories that in art there's this collective like secret underground organization. I'm like, I don't think it's really that. I think it's that, yeah, I think it's that you can't help but tap into the symbolism by the very nature of what art is. But
No, I
that's
completely agree.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think at the same time that
That doesn't mean there aren't people using the symbols, but I mean, I don't think that every artist out there is part of that.
yeah, it's funny when I first started studying this stuff and getting into it and started to recognize the power in it. Um, it kind of made me think of like,
Yeah,
okay, are people that are sitting in cubicles and doing graphic design for corporations and things like that, have they stumbled upon this thing, this other,
right,
because of for completely capitalistic and secular reasons, and they just kind of
right.
stumbled upon it? Or are they, like you said, the conspiracy theory, like they're practicing and they realize these things? And so I mean, I bet it kind of fits in the whole spectrum. So
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you can look at it in two ways too. There are some people who know what they're doing and they're doing it on purpose, and there's some people who are copying things that have worked, which just happen to use that same pattern, and they're seeing
Oh
the
yeah.
pattern without knowing what the pattern is, you know?
That's so true. And it's weird how like these things are, I mean, for lack of a better term, almost have each symbol has an egregore to it,
Hmm.
and is capturing all the collective knowledge from, God knows where,
Yeah.
but like the collective knowledge and the collective energy from that symbol. And so when individuals tap into that one specific symbol,
Hmm.
are also like almost piggybacking onto all the knowledge and all the information that that symbol had before. I mean, I tend to think that these things, and I have my own weird theories about involving how these things affect, but I feel like they're beyond space and time in a sense, and that they're
Right.
they're transcendent, and that's a lot. I feel like how synchronicity happens,
Hmm.
because these things are beyond space and time, and they're in the collective conscious, and because they jump around, that's how, when like something further on down the road, and then you make that connection, you're like, oh no, like that's how that thing connected with that, and then it's
Right.
beautiful.
Right.
It's universe winking at you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I've recently started personally. I call my interactions with what I call the grand infinity or the universe or whatever. I've been calling it a dance with the grand infinity because that's kind of what it feels like to me.
And it's totally, I mean, that fits in line with the Nataraja statue and Shiva, and
Hmm.
the dance of the cosmos. And but I recently was listening to Terrence McKenna, and um, he talked about when he met a Hindu, and he wanted to expose him, initiate him, and he said, well, ask the other what religion is, and it's just such a beautiful line. And he said that the Hindu had said that the other had told him that the Hindu had said that religion is just the refuse that washes up upon the shore, but I am the.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you use symbolism purposefully in your art now, or is it just something that you've noticed comes up naturally?
I think it, like you said, it's a dance. I think it's both.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because especially pertaining to the tarot, uh, my initiation into tarot was kind of unique, I think, as I've learned, because I went into studying the tarot and building the deck that I'm working on right now,
Hmm.
um, without any knowledge really of it. I mean, I knew some basic things about the tarot,
Hmm.
but I didn't really know anything about it. And so I kind of was like, oh well, I'm an artist, and
Right.
I feel like this would be a great way for me to understand these things,
Yeah.
is by building, actually creating a deck. So it's been, not only been this interesting, amazing, crazy journey of getting to know the tarot, but also like it's almost like a portrait of how my consciousness is
Right.
shifting as I go along on the journey, the fool's journey.
Yeah, exactly. And you're sort of you're taking apart the symbolism that's already there in order to rebuild it. So you're having to notice a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, and what that's actually really interesting, because there is this weird dialogue that goes on. I kind of relate it to like like in the golden age of Hollywood,
Hmm.
genre directors, where you had like someone like John Ford, who was, you know, basically known, was hired on as a director of westerns,
Hmm.
and that's all he really ever, like The Searchers, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, things like
Right.
that, and they were stuck in this genre, and in a lot of ways I don't think they really liked the genres that they were forced to be in, but at the same time they were able to talk about and express some really, really amazingly personal things about them
Right.
through the genre. And I feel like the tarot is kind of that way, because not only do you have your own ideas and your own opinions and what you want to say, but at the same time, you have to respect this conversation that's been going on for hundreds of years.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, do you feel that um, Hollywood as a whole, as it is now, do you feel that it's kind of moved further away from, I guess, what would be like the natural artist, or you think it's just evolved into something different?
Oh man, come on. Well, I would say that artists are always going to exist in any medium.
Hmm.
But in my humble opinion, I believe that the artists, that the really beautiful time in cinema was like the 60s going into the 70s,
Yeah, there's definitely
because
a
you had,
difference of the craft back then.
what's that?
There's definitely a difference of the craft back then as far as how many hands are involved, how much the corporations are involved, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And the freedom, because I feel like now that, back then, the director, the auteur was given, not obviously never without a fight, and there was always a bit of hustle involved.
Hmm.
Because like Orson Welles once said, filmmaking is 98% hustle and 2% filmmaking.
Yeah.
But I believe like the producers gave, because just as much as they were crazy directors, they were crazy producers
Right.
too.
Yeah.
And I feel like now, because of the amount of money being spent, and the amount of power that movies have taken on across the world, that it's just, the stakes are too high, and when that's
Right.
involved, lawyers are going to get involved,
Yeah.
pencil pushers are going to get involved, and so in a lot of ways it's stifled creative freedom. That
Yeah.
all being said, there is still a lot of great art in filmmaking.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess you could look at the video game industry kind of similarly too, because in the beginning everything was kind of like what we'd consider an indie product now.
Yeah, yeah, and then in the indie product, yeah, and the indie product will always be there.
Yeah.
And now with the way technology and the way the internet and social media is now, it's just, there's no excuse. I mean, it's
Hmm.
like before, when everyone was shooting on a film. I mean, it was an expensive art form.
Right.
But now with, there's all these different, consumer apps that you can express yourself visually with the moving picture,
Hmm.
and really make, do awesome stuff. So
Yeah.
it's a cool time we're living in. It's exciting.
Yeah, definitely. So as you're working on building your own tarot, are you planning to eventually sell them, or is it just going to be something personal?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this look badly on me, but I couldn't start the project without seeing it eventually being turned
Yeah.
into it. I
Yeah, I
feel
can
like,
understand that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there had to be that end game in mind.
Well, you
So
have a big time sink you have to put into anything like that, and so it makes sense if you can double up and do something that's valuable to you while at the same time making a profit. It's
yeah,
always a good idea.
yeah, definitely.
Hmm. Is it at a point now where you can share it with anybody, or is it still being worked?
Oh no. I mean, they can go on my Instagram account and
Hmm.
see the progress that has been done.
Okay.
Uh,
Is that
my
something you'd be willing to share with the folks here, or or do you want to
Absolutely,
keep? Okay, cool.
totally.
Yeah, feel free.
So if everybody listening, you can find me on Instagram at noheechul.com, which is NOHHEECHUL. That's my Korean name.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I'll put it in the description after we're done too, so that in the re-record, when people are watching the pre-recorded, then they'll be able to see it down there.
Okay, cool.
Cool. And that's how we know each other. We met on Instagram, so.
Yeah, and let me just say, Joe, when I first started, kind of looking around at the YouTube hermetic scene,
Hmm.
there is just so much nonsense out there, and I don't want to talk harshly, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do.
And so, like, as with, like, now more than ever, it's like when sledging around the internet, you have to, critically look at everything and be like, okay, like, where is this person coming from?
Yeah.
But when I came across your channel, I was really, really moved, because a lot of the same questions that I had, you were definitely, asking yourself, and just the way, you have documented your own path and your journey, man, it was inspiring. And then, especially when you came out with that video, when you talked about the trauma in your life, I was
Hmm.
like, oh man, this is real. Like, this guy is, he's doing the great work, and it was moving to me, man, and I'm sure it was moving to a lot of other people. So, namaste, man.
Oh, thank you, thank you. That's one of
Yeah.
those things where it was hard to do, but then afterward, I got such an outpouring of good, positive responses from people, especially in private messages. where people had relatable stories similar to what had happened to me, and that showed me how not alone I am in this situation. So I actually got a lot out of that myself.
Ah, it's beautiful. It's so
Hmm.
beautiful. So,
I,
but
st I still
and
get some
also
now. I still
like,
get people saying, "Just watch that video," and man, it touched me in this way, and then we'll connect and talk about similarities, and it's always crazy how much of the same has happened to so many people.
yeah, yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So
Um,
we talked about the Tarot project. Do you have other art projects in the works right now?
yeah, I have a, it's like the way the way my brain works. It's like I very rarely get blocked. It
Hmm.
seems to be almost more the opposite of like I have
Too much.
too much,
Yeah.
exactly. And then it's like, and I think part of the reason, part of the art practice for me is releasing, those energies and those things inside me, because it's like if I don't, it's like I get super depressed and I get irritable, and
Hmm.
so it's like art is a good way, and music and all the creative things I do is a way for me to release
Yeah.
those thoughts, and at this, because if I don't, it's like, it's like pretty soon they'll get really extravagant, and it's like,
Yeah.
there'll be
Yeah.
dancing girls in there, and then there'll be like it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And so, but I've gotten to the point now where um it's like usually I have a problem working on more than one project at the same time to my
Hmm.
own detriment, and I think that's probably just from me working in the film industry.
Hmm.
But
Do
I
you?
normally, usually, while I'm starting to finish up a project,
Hmm.
I'll pull one of the other ideas and start kind of musing and thinking about it, and like, so yeah, I already have a pretty good idea of what my next project's
Oh,
going to
that's
be.
cool. Do you find that if you stop in the middle of a project and move to a different project, it kind of puts you in a different frame of mind and makes it hard to go back?
Oh, absolutely. And it's, but I know it for some artists, it can be really helpful because they can inform each other.
Right.
But it's like, so like for instance, so one of the projects, it won't be my next project, but one of the projects I've kind of have been planning in my head is taking the myths of Dionysos and kind of putting them in a visual representation,
Hmm.
but totally from like the point of psychodrama, because I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of the myths, the Greek, all myths, I mean all myths,
Hmm.
but specifically that, like with Dionysos, he was a god who was directly dealing with the subconscious.
Mm,
He was
yeah.
and shadow self,
Hmm.
and there's this, and we're talking about the egregore of things, you see this lineage starting from the ancient Greeks, or the Thracians,
Hmm.
and then eventually developing into, getting further on down the road to like Nietzsche and him
Hmm.
using the archetype,
Yeah.
Jung using the archetype.
Yeah.
And so I really kind of want to like put in my 2 cents,
Right.
and and express those ideas of what, because as we all know with gnosis, well, some of us, not everybody, but there are different levels of understanding to not just mythology but all things. But I'll use the example of mythology,
Hmm.
and obviously at the low, and for my studying, I'm also interested in history, but for my studying of these things is that, you know number one, most people couldn't read or write back then in ancient
Yeah.
times. So there's that to deal with,
Hmm.
to contend with. And then on top of that, the ones that could read and write, they were the magicians, they were the priests, they were the priestesses, they were the ones that were holding the knowledge.
Hmm.
And because there was no, and I think, Nietzsche talked about this in The Birth of Tragedy, because there hasn't been this separation between the right and left hemispheres as pronounced in the
Right.
ancient times, because we've had the scientific method, we have all the scientific, revolution, all these different things
Yeah.
to validate empiricism,
Hmm.
enlightenment, all these different things. So
Right.
I think that part of, like part of the knowledge that was passed down works on 4 levels. And I actually recently just came to this information download about pertaining to the tree of life and the four sections and the level of consciousness. So I guess the I can't remember them all, but it's like Yetzirah, Asira, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But at the lowest level, at the Malkuth Yesod level, it would be like the literal. Like I consider it like the fundamentalist level. Like people taking the myths and saying this really happened, this is true.
Right. Yeah.
And then the next level being like the cosmological. So specifically, like in the Egyptian myths, where they were talking about procession, they were talking about all these different the cosmological view of their universe,
Mm-hmm.
and hid it in mythology and symbol. And then the next level would be like the inner, like the philosopher's stone, per se, and the union of as above, so below.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
the highest level being, Ein Sof, which would be like the complete divine. And so I feel like if you look at mythology from that point of view,
Mm-hmm.
that it's very easy to parse. Well, not easy, but it gives you an insight into parsing out what the ancients were really trying to express, and the
Right.
knowledge they were trying to impart back and forth to each other.
Right. Yeah. And how they were trying to kind of impact society as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, you see come the Middle Ages, you see, with when you actually started getting into the Hermetic scientists,
Mm-hmm.
You start to see them take those ideas from the ancients, from Pythagoras, from Greece, and then kind of do it in their own kind of weird way. And
Yeah.
and what's interesting is that what I find interesting is that because there wasn't this separation of subjectivity and objectivity, and the need for that separation, that that it is almost like the Hermetic scientist was a fine artist in a way, because not only were they trying to understand the cosmos, understand themselves, and understand the higher planes, but they were also trying to do it in this kind of sneaky artistic way, and
Right.
and a
Yeah.
way that is individualistic to them.
Yeah. I mean, it was dangerous to do it any other way, of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, in some
But then
places it still is.
But then it's weird though, because it was like, if the in a lot of ways the church, specifically probably the Catholic Church, you see this slow kind of like Walmart sucking of all the ideas. It's like Walmart moves into a town, kills all the mom and pop stores,
Yeah.
and then just starts like sucking all the energy from the small community. And I mean, in the same way, I feel like the Catholic Church kind of did that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where if you investigate it heavily enough, you can find the same ideas in other cultures from before, and you can see where they stole them from. And I use the word stole loosely, though. Where they borrowed them from is maybe a better way to put it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And a lot of people, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir on this channel, but a lot of people are aware that when the church was first being formed, Rome was governed by many gods, and they had control of so many areas that everybody had their own views, and they were trying to kind of make one religion so that everybody could be under the same umbrella. Everybody would know the same set of rules to follow and things like that. And so that was actually one of the tasks placed upon the people in the Roman Catholic Church, was to build the religion in such a way that it was accessible to the already conquered lands. And lo and behold, when you look at like which myths got kind of merged into that, they're the ones from those lands. So they're actually, that's one of the reasons I say like there's still value there, because some of those stories are older than we even understand.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of mixed in.
And and not placing judgment, trying not to place judgment on those things, is that it's like, nothing is static,
right?
And not only that, but you look at like at the height of the Roman Empire, you had the Far East interacting with the West, and and then getting into the Crusades, and you see this cultural interaction that I feel like historians and occultists and hermeticists a lot of the time they like to like keep their stuff clean, like this is Thelema, this is Coptic Christianity, this is
Right.
but in actual fact, human beings interact with each other, they take ideas from each other. What we consider the mainstream Bible, it was all a collection of ideas
Yeah.
taken from all different cultures that were interacting with each other.
Yeah, and that wasn't even a strange thing back then. So that's why I say it's kind of harsh to use the word stolen because it's more like just sort of the way things were done. Uh,
Yeah. No, that's such a good point, because it's like now we look at things with this idea of like plagiarism, and
yeah,
when it actually, and back then it was like it was perfectly, and even not that long ago, like in colonial times, you look at like the writing of our Constitution.
hmm
Thomas Jefferson was ripping off John Locke
hmm
and Rousseau. So even then, it plagiarism is a very, and I think with the rise of capitalism, probably
yeah,
is plagiarism and intellectual,
yeah, intellectual
ownership is.
property.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as they came up with the idea of intellectual property and kind of ownership of an idea, that's when I think all of that changed.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you think about how stories were told in the past, and they were all kind of word of mouth. So everybody was just telling the same stories as each other and putting their own spin on it and things like that originally. And that's kind of where writing evolved from originally, at least for storytelling.
Absolutely. And also, kind of, you know, and I guess this is getting back into the tarot, but the archetypes
hmm
of those stories, and something, back when, it starts back when we were, I mean, actually, like the next art project I'm working on is dealing with the exact subject of like getting back to the core of like what were the original symbols. And
Yeah,
there's a number of anthropologists that have gone really, really deep into like developing, a loose alphabet from studying all these different, ancient, like Stone Age, sites of like what were possibly the original symbology that has transcended all cultures and all peoples. Really, really interesting.
yeah. And what do you use for a source for tarot? Because I know for me, I use the Universal Weight tarot deck. A
Mm,
lot of
mm.
people usually use that, but is that what you look at first and foremost, or do you have a different source?
Um, I you know you know I I feel like modern postmodern tarot in its form right now
hmm
kind of fit into four movements per se. So, the first one being the Marseille tarot,
hmm
the French tarot, the earliest, really widely popular, pressed and used throughout Europe.
Right.
And then, after that, I would say probably the Waite tarot,
hmm
the Waite Smith tarot. Remember the Smith part; that's important. and and then probably after that, the Hermetic, getting into the Golden Dawn and Crowley, I
Yep.
would say that, the Hermetic Tarot and the Thoth Tarot. I personally myself use the Thoth Tarot because I feel like it is a deck that is deceptively simple and easy
hmm
to use, and the art and the concepts in it are very strikingly beautiful
hmm
and modern. But at the same time, as you dig deeper and deeper into the Thoth, you see the brilliance that Crowley brought to it.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
I,
I
I
think if
actually I
oh,
have
go ahead.
something to say about the Waite Tarot.
Okay.
Um, no offense, Joe, but, being a deck builder, I respect the Waite Tarot. I respect,
Mhm.
um, what it has accomplished as far as an egregore within tarot, but I
hmm
feel like it's also kind of the Walmart of tarot in a way
Yeah,
too, because it's
that's true. It's
like,
the easiest to
so
find,
often.
cheapest to get.
Yeah, and also just from looking at it from an art point of view, it's like I see so many other decks out there that, like that other deck builders have made, and it's just like, they're just basically using the ideas from the Waite Tarot and then like changing a few things here and there,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yep.
no, which is interesting. But at the same time, it's just like, all right, come on, like let's do something new. Like let's
Right.
keep it evolving. Like pay respect to what the Waite Smith Tarot was, but at the same time, like let's try to as an artist, in my opinion, you're as an artist is to capture your time,
Mm-hmm.
yourself, and what's going on with you, and it's super important.
For me, I use tarot more when I was practicing kind of some Golden Dawn techniques and things like that. And in the beginning, they have you looking at a card and using it to represent something within your day and things like that. There's these
Yeah,
exercises. And so I've been through all of that. So I kind of understand the symbolism in the cards and things, but I don't personally use tarot as in the traditional sense. I don't, set out a spread and use it to divine. But I know people who do, and I have people I trust that do it that I've gotten some really, really interesting stuff from. Do you practice tarot in the traditional sense, or do you use it more as kind of like a symbolic guide, like what I was talking about?
Because I approach the tarot, and I could say this about all like my interest in Hermeticism. I would say that I grew up pretty conservative Christian, and then at some point, logic and rationalism kind of gets the better of you, and then you start thinking outside that. But I would say that, I was very, I was formally taught in music and kind of formally self-taught. And so all these different, so I wanted Hermeticism to be the one thing where it's like, well, I just want this to totally be my thing. And so I approached the tarot that way. And, I do spreads, but my methodology is quite a bit different than I don't really get into like pre-made spreads, or
you don't do like the Celtic cross and stuff like that.
Yeah, I still don't even know like what all the meaning is in the Celtic cross. The most basic of tarot. I'll tell you my methodology though.
Sure.
So basically, while I'm shuffling the cards, I'll have an intention, and then while I'm shuffling, I'll continue to shuffle, and I'll have the spread that I'm going to use just visualize come to me while I'm shuffling. Okay. And I'll usually keep shuffling until I get the idea of the spread, and then once I get the spread, I'll lay it out, and in a way, it's kind of looking at it. Because when you critically, like when people go to art museums and things like that, they're looking at art, and if you're looking at art the right way, you're seeing a visual representation of a person. It's magic, You're seeing a visual representation of someone's consciousness,
Yep.
And so I try to look at like the tarot that way is like, it's an interactive, your own little interactive art gallery,
Yeah. And one of the people that I work with that does some tarot for me and I really trust, they just kind of pull a card and look. And sometimes they'll get the sense to pull more cards or less cards. They'll be like, well, this one's going to be 3 cards. But again, it's just like you were saying, it's while you're in that state shuffling the deck, you kind of
it's intuitive,
drawn to what you're supposed to pull. I always find that interesting because, again, I don't use it much myself, but I've always found it really interesting when I find folks that are really good at it.
Yeah. It's just like as with with meditation or anything else, it's a practice. The more you do it, the more you're going to get more out of it.
I find that sometimes I'm able to get something from it. Like if I can, sometimes I'll have a question, I'll just flip a tarot. I'll shuffle and then flip and just see what I get. And sometimes if I'm in the right state of mind, it seems like I can just key in on whatever that image just kind of gets me to think, and that will answer my question. But if I'm too frantic or if I'm too in my own head, then I get lost in that tarot, like trying to figure out what the hidden meanings are or whatever, and I can't do what I'm supposed to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know. It's easy to get lost in the tarot rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But, I would say that the weird thing about that I've experienced with the tarot, and it really hasn't. So I get to the point. I just finished the 9s, and so I've finished the major arcana in the 9s and working on the 10s. But I would say that like it really didn't start happening until I started working on the minor arcana. But I feel like how you kind of working with the tarot, how you kind of know that like, that the gnosis is coming is through synchronicity.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, so for instance, I'll just give you a spooky example of a story of what happened recently. So I just finished doing the Nine of Cups, and the Nine of Cups is one of the, I guess, I don't want to say positive because I feel like that actually this is an important point about the tarot. let me say this. First of all, so the sooner, I feel like one of the major things the tarot teaches you is to get out of binary thinking.
Yeah.
To get out of the Malthusian checkerboard, for lack of a better term.
Right.
And to learn that it's like these different things, even though they may have, like the Tower or the Ten of Swords, or, these things that naturally have really horrible context. The point is to get to know, to get to know your consciousness, to get to know those experiences to the point where, you understand them. I don't think you'll ever quite master them, but at this, but to be like, no, this isn't bad. This is just part of what you're experiencing in life. And, and part of gaining the gnosis is like, oh, I've been here before. I know I've gained wisdom in this experience. I know how to deal with it. And I feel like the tarot really hones in on those energies. And so you specifically have to, deal with them.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Some of it's like if you keep getting the same thing, eventually you're like, okay, I've been through this.
yeah, and you know what to expect. Okay, so back to the earlier story. So the Nine of Cups, it's all about happiness, but it's connected to, because it's the nine, it's connected to the Hermit, and so like using the weight Nine of Cups would be, it's a portly man, looks like he's wealthy with 9 cups behind him, and he's like he's content. So a friend of mine who was also an artist, I dedicated that card to him. I came up with the idea because he has a close connection to the Hermit card. I dedicated that card, and I was thinking about him while I came up with the idea, and I was like, oh, well, I'm just going to make this card basically a portrait of him, how I see him, like an astral portrait of him, per se. And so I texted him, and I said, hey, man, I'm going to dedicate the Nine of Cups to you. And he wrote back to me and went, and he didn't respond. All he just said, that's spooky. And so, so I made the card, which was also kind of synchronistic and beautiful, and kind of by chance, but not really. I made the card on, let's see, what was it? Sunday. Was it Sunday? When was the supermoon? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't remember the exact date.
Oh, I think it was Sunday. But anyways, I made the card on the supermoon. Yeah, it was on Sunday. And and also the night, if you look at the suit of cups, about emotions, and then the nines are also connected to Yesod, which is governed by the moon. So there were all these connections going on. So I made the card and got done, and then sent it to him and blah blah blah. And then he texted me back the next day, and he goes like, well, I didn't tell you this, but I did a reading for a friend of mine a few hours before you sent me that first original text, and I drew the moon, the Nine of Cups, and the Fool.
Oh yeah, nice.
So I was just kind of like, oh, beautiful, And I feel like that's kind of how the weird way in which the tarot work. But there's all these different entry points in which, you can use Kabbalah, you can use your intuition, you can use, the Tree of Life. It's just, there's so many different, the numerology, the gematria. There's just so many different entry points in which you can get insight from it.
Yeah, very cool. Well, we're actually coming up on the hour, so I want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joe, man. You're awesome.
Yeah, we got to do this again sometime.
Absolutely, I'd love to, anytime.
Okay, and if you want to, one last time, give out your Instagram for those who may have come in late.
Oh, yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at noheechul.com. That's NOHHEECHUL. CHUL. But I also have a website, NoHeChul, just nohechul.com. But that I haven't updated in a while because I've been working on this tarot project. But once I get the text, I'll update it.
Yeah, I understand.
A lot of my other art and writing and stuff like that are on the website. So
cool. Well, thanks very much, and until next time, safe travels.